I recently finished playing Silent Hill 2 for the very first time, and I really liked the game. For those of you who don't really play horror games and are still listening, Silent Hill 2, part of the Silent Hill franchise, was released in 2001, and it follows our main character, James Sunderland, as he goes into the town of Silent Hill. The reason he goes into the town is because he is searching for his wife, Mary. However, Mary's been dead for 3 years. So, upon finishing Silent Hill 2, I've been thinking about it a lot. And to me, Silent Hill 2 is a representation of shadow work. And if you don't know, shadow work is a process where you kind of look inward to yourself. It's a process where you face your bad habits, your bad traits, your actions that you're guilty of or ashamed of, and in a way you come to terms with them so that you can be a better person. That's a very casual explanation of what shadow work is. Shadow work is something that all of us do, and it's something that you don't just do once, it's something that you kind of have to do from time to time. And the reason why I'm bringing up shadow work in connection with Silent Hill 2 is because James has to face an action he did. This action is him killing his wife. We know that James killed his wife because she was sick. He felt guilty of seeing her like that while he was still able to leave the hospital. And because he was frustrated of having to be there for her, which is something that happens a lot to people. And that sadness and frustration, anger got the better of James and he killed his wife. One of the things Silent Hill is known for is having characters face what they have done. The town actively digs into a person's mind and pulls out their darkest secrets, their fears, and whatever it can in order to enact some sort of punishment or to get a character to face what they've been hiding or ignoring. And this is what James has to do. He has to face and realize the fact that he killed his wife. And in a weird way, this is what Silent Hill shows. It shows the act of going through shadow work. Though granted, it's in a more graphic way, as it is a horror game. But still, it shows the process of shadow work, especially in Silent Hill 2. I guess you could say it shows a visual image of how shadow work is and how painful it can be. And another thing I think about upon finishing the game is that there's a lot of blockages in Silent Hill 2, which is kind of weird, but yeah, there's a lot of blockages. And at first when I was playing, I didn't really think about these blockages that much. I didn't really care for them. I just thought, oh, the game is just trying to make things harder for us, just how games do. But now as I sit here, I'm realizing that maybe those blockages represent something. And these blockages come in two forms. They come in the physical town blockages, as the broken roads, the way buildings are set up, the doors that you can't get through without certain keys and stuff like that, and like the big blockages, like the road blockage that you can't get through, and the blockage that's in the middle of town that has a doorway but you can't go in there because there's a key. That's the first blockage. The second blockage is with the monsters. Specifically for me, it is Maria and Pyramid Head. And what these blockages represent is ego. Now, if you don't know, when you start on a spiritual journey, you start improving on stuff about yourself, which is good. It's something that we would all like. However, there's a part of you that doesn't like it. It doesn't like having to face reality. It doesn't like being uncomfortable. That part of you is ego. The ego I am referring to in this video is the more common thing we think of. It is not in line really with Sigmund Freud's idea of ego, which changes depending on your age. The ego I'm talking about is more along the lines of your pride and your selfishness. I guess if I were to put it in a phrase that was recognizable, your ego is getting the better of you, or your ego is too big. It's our more common ego that we think about. Now, like I said, James's ego comes in two forms: the physical blockages and the monsters. And the reason why this ego is so prevalent in Silent Hill for James is because it is trying to stop him from getting to Mary. If he gets to Mary, he realizes what he had done. But there are ways to get past these blockages, this ego, if you look at the keys. When I was playing Silent Hill, I noticed that there was a lot of keys. And that could just be me, because this is my second Silent Hill game. But comparing it to Silent Hill 4, Silent Hill 2 had way more keys than 4. So I'm thinking maybe there's a reason for that. What if the keys represent the desire to continue? And the reason I say this is because of one cutscene. When James goes to the dirt floor of the apartment complex, the first one, he sees a key on the ground. However, this key is on the other side of bars. He tries to grab it, and he can almost reach it, but out of nowhere, Laura comes and kicks the keys away from him. If you notice, there are two forms of blockages right here. Now, for me, Laura is not a monster. She is just someone who got caught up in all the chaos in Silent Hill. However, if you think about it, she could be. So for the sake of this part, let's say she is a monster that Silent Hill made up for James. If keys represent the desire to learn and continue to get to Mary, James faces two blockages of ego here. First is the physical barrier, the bars, that stop him from being able to reach the key. The second barrier of ego is Laura. She kicks the keys out of his range to make it harder for him to get it. So that's why I think keys are a representation of the want to go forward. Keys represent the steps taken in a spiritual journey. That is why there are so many of them in James's journey, because the keys are needed in order for James to move forward. They give him a piece of information, either in what he had done or how to move forward. And that's why it is so hard to find these keys. Now going into the second form of ego, which is the monsters. Originally, I wanted to focus on Pyramid Head and Maria, but now that I'm thinking about it, if we count Laura as a monster, then she could be counted in this group. In Freud's ego scaling, there are three parts. There is id, which is the sort of infant stage where you listen to your instincts. There is ego, the middle stage, usually between teenage years, where you kind of think yourself as the center of the world, but you kind of realize that there's people around you, but you mainly focus on yourself. Then there is superego, adults, where you kind of understand where right and wrong is, what values are, what morals are. And to Freud, this is stages of life. However, someone could get stuck in one stage and not go to superego. Taking his theme very loosely, Pyramid Head would represent James's id, Maria would represent James's ego, and Laura would represent James's superego. With Pyramid Head, if you watch his actions, he doesn't really think, he just goes off instinct. And he is the main blockage that James faces mostly, because James might not realize it, but his action of killing Mary was part of his id. When he killed her, he did it out of anger and frustration. He didn't really think. He sort of just went off instinct and didn't really think things through. And that's why he represents James's it. At the end of the game, when James faces Pyramid Head and he doesn't try to excuse what he had done, he ultimately just confesses what he did and accepts it. Hence why Pyramid Head ends up piercing himself, because James is no longer feeding that id, ignoring what he had done. He is coming to terms with it. And as a result, he is coming to terms with all his emotions that he was feeling, his instincts that he was feeling, and everything that Pyramid Head represents. But James accepts that those feelings were a part of him, and that they were feelings that were ones that led to his actions against Mary. Maria, representing Ego, is one that's kind of interesting to me. At first, she doesn't seem like a monster part of Silent Hill, but towards the end of the game, we realize that she is. And Ego is, like I said, a selfish form. It makes itself to be the center of a world, though still tries to have like some sorts of morals and values. And this is what Maria shows James. She purposely shows James his wife, but dresses her up into more seductive clothing and tries to be more nicer to him than Mary was in her final days. And the reason I think Maria does this is because she is trying to give James the idea that he deserves everything he ever wanted. The way Maria presents herself, she is showing a more comfortable way to James. If you look at the interaction between Mary and James, they are pretty comfortable around each other. James ultimately feels connected with her because she reminds him of Mary, yet he is not reminded of the negative things that Mary had said to him. Maria purposely left those negative aspects of Maria out when she chose her image, her appearance, because she is trying to draw James in to her, to be comfortable around her, to accept her more than his wife. That's probably why she always says, "You're mistaking me for Maria," or along those lines, something like that. That is why whenever he cares more about his wife, Maria gets mad, because if he gets closer to his wife, he ultimately forgets about Maria. And that's why Maria represents Ego, because Ego doesn't want you to forget about it. It wants you to know that it's always there for you. It wants you to know that it is the comfortable area. Maria is the comfortable area for James, while giving him the sense that he deserves everything. Ego gives you the sense that you're the center of the world. Now, Laura being super ego might contradict what Freud would say. She is a child, so he would probably put her with it. But Laura is, in a way, super ego. It's a weird way of putting it, but she knows what right from wrong is. Like I said, it's weird because her actions don't really show that, but her thoughts do. In the end, she realizes, if you get the good ending per se, that James wasn't all that bad, yet she is able to see his mistake once she learns about it. At the good ending, she happily goes with James, showing that she has some sort of forgiveness, that she is able to understand why James killed Mary. And if that doesn't really scream super ego, I don't really know what is, because Laura really was connected with Mary. She loved her like a mother. And that's why she was always searching for Mary too, because Mary was going to adopt her. And she didn't like James from the beginning, even when she learned about him at the hospital. But yet she was able to forgive him for taking away a possible mother. But she too is kind of going through her own journey. At the beginning, when we first meet her, she kicks the key away from James, showing id. When she is running around town on her own, that is her ego. And at the end, she reaches super ego. So it's like a journey within a journey. And Laura, I guess, is ultimately supposed to represent to James the journey of how going through the stages of shadow work works. And to me, that's also interesting. Maria and Laura are two interesting characters that, in their own right, show James possible outcomes that he could get. If James follows Maria and goes with her at the ending, he is still in a comfortable zone. He didn't really face anything, he just sort of realized what happened. However, with the comfortable zone, there's a possibility of having to go in a cycle again, having to face what you had done over and over again, because at the end, Maria is coughing, and it is hinted that she has something, maybe an illness. With James going into the more comfortable option, it is likely he is going to experience the same events he and Mary had with Maria and Laura. James moved on to superego too. He accepted what he had done. He forgave himself, Mary forgave him, and he is able to move on. In the good ending where James leaves with Laura, he has completed all his shadow work in regards to Mary. Silent Hill 2 is a game that is interesting because it shows you how shadow work is a process. It shows you all the hardships that go with it, all the pain and the emotions, and it shows you that if you try to overcome it and try to better yourself, you can be a better person. It also shows you where you can fall. It shows you what happens when you stay with ego. It shows you what happens when you just follow your id. And the ending I'm referring to is the one where James. But it is a full picture of how the journey is and all the different outcomes it can be. Now, this is kind of an extra point that I saw while playing. When you're in the prison, it is a confusing map because there is so many doors, there are so many entries and passageways, yet ultimately they all lead the same way. This prison and the place where all the ladders are, that whole maze shows the journey itself, shows all the ways you can go. Yet, I guess the deeper meaning is that there is not one way to a complete shadow work journey. There are different ways everyone could go. What works for one person may not work for another person. Another person may find a different path, but there is always going to be a way. You just gotta be patient, understanding, and willing to want to change and complete this journey. Anyway, like I said, I really loved this story. To me, it was a beautiful story, a sad, beautiful story.